Yeah, so Tim, great to regroup again. Thanks for going out and doing those soil tests on those pins we lined up in our last catch-up. So we managed to get the soil data back. So I thought it was a great opportunity just to run through some of the data we found and really link it into some of the zones we identified in this block to work out what might be holding some of these areas back and where some of the opportunities are. So I guess using the yield map as this base layer, just as a bit of a recap, we had these high yielding zones around up in the northern section, the southern section, and then we had this lower yielding zone in the middle. So really from that soil testing, we're trying to capture what might be different in that middle zone here compared to that northern side and that southern side. So just linking that grid back into it. So we did this sampling that you guys were able to collect for us is essentially was, just to clarify, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then back up here 7, 8. So they were the 8 samples we had as this grid across the block to really capture what these key zones are identifying that might be different. So as we went through, just having a look at that, we've also got the raw data here as well, just as a reference. Find it good to link between the two, just to help put into context. Obviously, there's a lot of data we do capture when we are collecting the soil tests, and then that's really just trying to refine it back around what that most limiting factor might be currently, and then stepping into the next one. So, as we touched on, we got that yield layer, and then we also had that protein layer. So we had that inverse effect of that high yield, low protein, and low yield, low protein there in the middle. So when we look at that and try to think, right, what might be holding this system back? So obviously nitrogen will be a key driver, but then we started really in that sort of a low scenario, we really do start looking for that next tier of nutrients as well. So is it phosphorus, potassium? Is it something else like pH, or maybe even a subsoil constraint like acidicity or salinity or something like that? So really that helps guide us in the right direction, and then we bring the data back in from there. So as we go through, I think the one to really start to link in is looking at the variation of the nitrogen and the phosphorus as our starting point. So if we have a look at the nitrogen here, so the nitrate, which is the number we usually get the highest reading of when we come and do the soil testing. So we'll kept focus on that for this one. But we can see we had this bit of a spread. This is in the topsoil results, but we did capture down to that 0 to 60 centimetres. So in that nitrogen levels, we do have that variation in that carryover, sort of ranging from that 5.3 milligrams, 5.7 milligrams per kilogram up to 13. So we do have that bit of a spread going across. So the lowest being over in this zone, which, if you recall, is that lower yielding area. So yeah, is that lower yielding area in here, and then this is the middle range in here. So these purples are in sort of the middle readouts, and then the highest reading was over here on that northeastern side. So yeah, interesting spread across there. I think we can work out on the back of those reserve nitrogen levels. I think we can certainly start tailoring a variable rate nitrogen strategy off that data. Then if we step through into the phosphorus, which is another interesting one, just seeing this spread of phosphorus results, which might be easier to see as on the table over here in the Excel data, as well as on the map. But we're ranging between that 15 to 61 milligrams per kilogram. So we do have this big spread of phosphorus across these fields. So it could be paddock history or management, especially different trials that might have been done in the past. So we do have that that spread across there. So for me, working through the phosphate layer, I think it might be a really good one to target. But just out of interest, Tim, just what sort of target, I guess, those critical P levels you'd be looking for in your area here?
Generally, the critical Colwell P in the WIMR is we talk about 25. So yeah, there's a bit of room to improve on 3 of them there. Yeah, no, look, once we're getting over 25, we're generally pretty comfortable. And if we've got coal peas over 30, they're a very good level. North of Horsham, we don't generally tend to see a lot of coal peas over 30 anymore. So that's, yeah, no, there's some fairly good pea levels, really.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, some good results in there. But yeah, I think just identifying on the map here that those levels below 25 is these three zones, that 15, 19 and 22 milligrams per kilogram, which 2 of those are sitting in this middle zone, which was that lower yielding zone as well. So I think that's going to be potentially pointing us in a bit of a direction of why we are not setting up that yield target originally. Just we're not having that early P availability there. So I think there is a good opportunity on that that phosphate management in this sort of zone as well.
Well, once I start to see coal P levels get down towards 10, I'm sure we're starting to see a real yield drop off, even with applied fertiliser. So those zones need to have a building phase as well as fertilised for this year's crop. So they need to be trying to be built back up to, well, at least over 20 in my mind.
Sure. So I guess when factoring in the variable rate this year, they'll work out essentially what our removals are going to be, plus a bit extra in those zones to just start building up that reserve pool.
Yep.
Yeah, righto. And then going through, I guess trying to really identify, is there anything else? Like we've got the nitrogen, yes, is varying across the field. The phosphorus definitely has some variation in it. And then I guess going through, we had sulfur does vary a bit, but I guess linking that through, is it the main driver at this stage? I don't think it necessarily is, but it's something to keep an eye on. But I thought I'd just go through to some of the subsoil constraint issues, which may be there. We look at the sodium percentage. So when we look at, soil from a soil structural stability perspective, when the exchangeable sodium percentage gets above, so around that 6% mark, we classify it as being sodic, which can have some impact on essentially water extraction from those soils. In the top soils, look, we're generally sitting around that 1 to 2 sort of mark. We do have a couple of areas in that zone 6 and 7. So in that northern, 6 down here and then 7 up here. So there's potentially a bit of a strip through here that might have the higher sodium as a percentage there, and that's 4.3, 4.7 in the topsoil. So in that subsoil, it might be worth keeping an eye on saying, is there a bit of a limiting factor underneath in that subsoil where the sodium might be creeping up? Just from that structural perspective, when we try and rely on essentially extracting that subsoil moisture. Chlorides and salinity. There is some, there is an increase in chlorides in a couple of these sites, but not. I don't think it's necessarily going to be its most limiting factor in this sort of scenario. The boron, especially once it starts getting into the double figures, I'll red flag for sure. But interestingly, where these numbers are, so we've got an 11, a 19, and a 25. So some of that boron, I feel is probably getting into a stage where it could be a bit of a handbrake in some of those areas. However, when we look back at the yield map and where those points are, so the 11 milligrams per kilogram and the 19 is site 3 and 4. So it's actually up this northern end, which has been the better yielding area anyway. So it might be that if there's a dry year where we're relying more on the subsoil, it might express itself. So it's just something to keep in mind. If we do see this area start decreasing in yield in a dry year, it might be starting to link back to that sodium and that boron story.
And also crop type with boron. So pulses really don't like escalated boron levels. Once we start getting boron levels to 20, lentils and particularly will drought out quicker. So that would be interesting to see the zones there in a legume phase, whether it changes at all.
Yeah, definitely. No, it will be worth worth tracking that, especially like we've gone over that 20 mark down in that site 6, which is down here in this bottom corner, which also had that high sodium. So there might be a drainage issue coming down this side of the block. So it's worth keeping an eye on, like you say, that the rotation, once we start analysing the data more and more over the rotation, it really starts telling that story. And I think it's just trying to work out this, I guess, the most cost-effective strategies to manage that. What's essentially the low-hanging fruit for us to be able to tackle in a nutrient management strategy, and then what do we have to just be aware of when we come to I guess knowing what a stress factor might be in the system that is sort of a bit more beyond our control, but it's just being aware of it. So I guess in this sort of a zone working back, I think that out of everything, yes, we've got some potential subsoil constraints coming into it, but really I think there's how we've sort of got such a defined zone here where that lower yielding area is, and it also correlates with that lower protein as well in this zone. So this is showing that low yield, low protein in the red, that correlation quadrant. So with that being usually when we see those red zones, there's something like fundamental, like usually linked back to the macronutrients that's holding this whole system back, which is where it sort of boils back to that nitrogen phosphorus story. And I think really with these numbers that have come back on the phosphorus side of things, getting down into the teens and below that critical value of 25, I think is something that we really would I think be worthwhile, a simple trial that we can be playing around with in this zone. So for your area, what sort of rates are you typically going out with your phosphorus, or like using say an MAP or? Yeah,
look, historically in a cereal phase and probably canola, we've been using 10 to 12 units. And in the legume phase, probably 6 to 8. They've been traditional units, but we have had a fairly good run of seasons in the last 10 years. So we may not have been really fertilising to meat replacement. So we may have to up that a little bit, I reckon, going into the future with some people.
Sure. Yeah, and I think the benefit of this is it's not necessarily the whole field you have to up those P rates, especially in a year like this, that we can be just a bit more selective on that. But I think it'll be worth seeing how responsive this zone is in the middle, whether we look to potentially run a couple of strips through here, so upping that. So you'll be sort of going out at that 80 or so kilos typically.
No, the farm's been using 11 units of phosphorus, which turns into around 50, 55 kilos granular. Is what they've been using in the past. So 50 to 60 kilos. So that's what they've been running long term.